Okay, in this tutorial, we're going to consider how to write a methodology. You will find in the particular area of the website where the methodology is 3 example methodologies, which I would strongly suggest you take a good look at to see how different students have approached the completion of this chapter of their project. Another thing I would do is I would develop some notes around some of the themes I discuss. You might want to do that on paper, or you might want to type that in a Google Doc as you watch this video, and then use the ideas that I described to you as well as the sample studies to complete your own method. Now, the first thing I would do is just pause the video in a second and read this opening chapter. Before you do that, let's just draw attention to the fact that this chapter is worth 10 marks. And it's basically a chapter that you're going to title Methodology and explore in as much detail as possible how you went about completing this particular step of the project. Okay, now I'm assuming you've read this introductory paragraph. Before we have a look at the actual marking guidance that the SQA will use to judge this, let's consider a possible structure. And you will see this structure in the 3 examples that I've included. So the very first part of this is that you would need a very clear plan. And you might even want to use that as a subheading. In the plan, you are going to identify that the data that needs to be gathered in order to answer the 3 research questions, as well as when you plan to collect it. So the when is an actual date and time, and a time of year, and both the data that you need and the when you're going to go and get it must be justified. Okay, so for example, if you are doing a study at a certain time of year or on a certain day of the week, how does the choice of that particular day or time of the week ensure that you are going to gather a good high quality amount of data? So that's what I mean by justifying, not just because it's a day that you're not at school, that's obviously a reasonable level of justification, but also why the selection of a holiday period or a day of the week or a particular time when you acquired your data, why was that essential? Linked to that, you might choose to put in your location of the study. So part of your plan is selecting a suitable location which you wish to conduct your study. Now, you're likely to want to use a map or a number of maps, sequence of maps, to actually show where your study area is. Most importantly, though, other than showing where it is, you must, and describing where it is using words, you must justify. So you must tell me why a particular town center, a particular river, or a particular area in which you gathered your data was suitable, both allowing you to study it, so why was it suitable for you in the context of maybe where you live and what you have access to, but also why is it suitable in the context of trying to answer the particular aim that you have established. Okay, so it's not just enough to say it's near where you live, you've got to clearly say that why the particular area that you're studying is suited. Okay, the next 2 parts are essential to gathering or acquiring high marks. So the sampling strategy that you have used to select the sites in which you are gathering data has to be fully explored. Now, it's likely going to have been a systematic, a random, or a stratified sampling strategy, or it might indeed have been a hybrid sampling strategy, which includes systematic and stratified together. And that's where you try to space your sites out as evenly as possible, but then you stratify them slightly, or that means you move them slightly because of maybe some kind of limitation in the place they originally were. That would be a more of a hybrid strategy. Key thing here, though, is not just telling me the strategy you used, but how it was used. How was it used to select the sites, justify why it was required, and include a map that shows those locations. The samples that I've included show you different ways that students have approached this. Finally, data gathering techniques. So this is where you explore the actual equipment and how you went about gathering the data. And when I say data, every piece of data that you've gathered, whether it's primary and or secondary data, so even if it's not your own data, but you've got it from websites, how you went around gathering the data that you needed. If sampling was used to gather a particular bit of that data, then you must talk about the strategy that was used in as much detail as you can. And as with all of the above, everything must be justified. Now, the justification in all 4 sections is important because It's where you explain the technique or the location or the method you used in the context of why it ensures that you are able to gather a lot of data, and also ensuring that that quality of that data is as good as is possible. Right, now let's just have a look, before we have a look at some examples of how to apply all of this, let's have a look at what the SQA says. So to achieve 8 to 10 marks, what kind of standard and what should you be doing? You must show clear and explicit evidence of detailed planning. Okay, so you must outline exactly when, where, and how in as much detail, and you explore that why you did it the way you did it. Okay, that can be done through maps, through annotated photographs, which I'll show you, and through even through hand-drawn diagrams, as well as detailed explanation. Second key idea, Canada supports their evidence by using relevant sources of information to produce sufficient data. So I need to be able to look at your techniques and ensure that there was a wide range of techniques across a wide range of areas to ensure that you got a lot of data. And that then allows you to analyze your results in as much detail as possible, which should allow you to come up with good conclusions. If I am looking at your method and it appears that you haven't acquired sufficient data that's not going to allow for detailed analysis, then I'm going to drop you down to one of the lower categories. Okay. Finally, skillfully using research techniques. So if you're extracting data from a secondary source, it's not just the source itself that you're using, but what data from that source are you using and how are you using that data? If you're gathering it from primary data sources like a field trip from a soil study or a river samples or its surveys or whatever technique you're using, I want to know exactly how you went about doing it and why you did it the way that you did it. And there's some examples that will show exactly how to target this in the 3 exemplars. All right, let's move on to the second part of this. Let's have a look at the examples. I'm going to start with methodology example 3. And we can see a person talking about a research question. And what I'm particularly interested in, though, is the methodology. So let's skip that first page and have a look at the method. So here we can see a very clear plan, not just when they went and why they went at that time of year, but where they went and why they selected that particular location. They've linked that into some photographs of their locations, which is completely appropriate because their place has a real geographic location. And they've got a map that indicates the location of those contrasting woodland areas in a wider geographical context, so I can see a town down here and the location of those woodland areas. They've then gone into more detail. They've talked about a sampling strategy they use to select their locations, and they've indicated that on an Ordnance Survey map for both of their forested areas in this case. Most importantly, though, rather than just naming it, they have justified why they did this sampling strategy. They've then listed the equipment that they required to gather the data. They had a very specific technique for gathering data at each of their sites, which they've outlined in a nice little diagram that they've created here. And then they have in detail described the process of gathering the data, explaining it, and most importantly, justifying it. And you'll notice they're doing it through annotated photographs, which are very impactful because they clearly demonstrate how the techniques were being applied and why they were using it. So these text boxes show exactly how they did it. Here we have them finding out moisture content and talking about the actual process that they used to acquire that data. All of the way through this, they've clearly demonstrated how they did it, linking their written descriptions to diagrams. So you see, I can see figure 9 and 10 here, and they refer to figure 9, shows the technique used to gather soil organic content. And there we can see figure 9. What's also really nice is that hand-drawn diagrams have been used to show techniques being applied with labels, and that's also, these were then scanned in. That's another really nice technique to present data. So there's one sample methodology. You might want to open that up and have a read through it, even though you will not necessarily be studying this, to see the approach and the level of detail in justifying the key things in their project. You'll see it there. All right, if we have a look at sample number 2 that you'll also find in the website, Here we have a much more structured approach. We have a plan with a full paragraph talking about where and when and why they went when they went. We've then got the sites that they were going to visit along that river, clearly labeled on an Ordnance Survey map with the tributaries marked and a little key. So the geographical location is clearly explored. The sampling strategy used to select the sites is fully explained, it's stratified, and it's justified why they did it that way. And then how they gathered the data itself, including sampling that was used, with annotated photos continually linking. So here we can see figure 10, which has got an annotated photograph showing the key themes, and the text here links what they're saying to figure 10. So I can read about how the measurement of discharge occurred. I can have a look at a photograph that shows it with a full explanation. They're also making use of their own hand-drawn diagrams to show about a systematic sampling strategy to select rocks in the river, with more annotated photographs clearly telling me about the process involved in acquiring data, along with sampling strategies that were used and the context they were used. Once again, hand-drawn diagrams have been very usefully and purposefully done here. Right, if we have a look at our final example, this one's a little bit different. This student has jumped straight into how they did a sampling strategy in terms of selecting their transects of study. They've talked about the equipment they needed, and then they've described that equipment and how it was used. We then see where their transects were located with some labels, and a photograph of their study area, which links with the map that shows their location. They then have a series of pictures which are annotated showing the technique and how they acquired the data. Once again, everything, and this is what when we read this, every technique they use, whether it was a sampling strategy or whether it was them actually gathering data, is explored, and it's not just described, but the most important piece of this information is where they justify why they did it that way and how that ensured they got high quality data. Okay, so what I would suggest you do is have a little look at all three of the methodology samples, and as you complete it, consider how you're going to structure it with subheadings, how you're going to make use of diagrams and photographs and maps. You'll probably want to use Digimap in order to extract an Ordnance Survey map, and then you're going to want to add to Digimap your information. So in RM Unify, you can go to Digimap, and then you should already by now know how to annotate and add information to maps in Google. But if you're not sure, then you'll need to speak to your teacher in order to show you how to do that. Good luck in completing your methodology. If you're wondering about the word length, you're probably looking about somewhere between 700 and 800 words as an absolute maximum.